I told my brother he's raising his kids to be horrible human beings. My brother Dan has 2 kids, Mason who's 11 and Chloe who's 9. I love them because they're my nephew and niece and I've known them their whole lives. But I've watched Dan and his wife Serena parent them in a way that has been making me increasingly uncomfortable for years, and I've said nothing because it wasn't my place. Last Sunday I ran out of nothing to say. For context, Mason and Chloe have never once been told no and meant it. Mason throws a fit in a restaurant and Dan changes the order. Chloe interrupts an adult conversation and Serena stops mid-sentence to listen. Last Christmas, Mason opened a gift from my parents, decided he didn't want it, and handed it back across the table to my mom while she was still smiling. Dan laughed. My mom's face did something she recovered from too fast. My daughter Isla is 7. She's been raised differently. She says please and thank you and she doesn't interrupt, and she understands that other people exist in rooms she walks into. I'm not saying she's perfect, I'm saying she understands basic things that Mason and Chloe at 11 and 9 still haven't been taught. Last Sunday was my parents' anniversary dinner at their house. Everyone was there, Dan and Serena, my husband Pete, Isla, the whole family. My mom had spent 2 days cooking. We were all sitting down when Mason decided he didn't want what was on his plate and pushed it away and said he wanted pasta instead. My mom said she hadn't made pasta. He said he wasn't eating this then and crossed his arms. Dan got up and started looking through my mom's kitchen cupboards for something Mason would eat. In my mom's kitchen, at her anniversary dinner, I watched my mom stand at her own stove making pasta for an 11-year-old who'd rejected the meal she'd spent 2 days preparing, and I felt something in me just snap completely. Dan came back to the table and I asked him quietly if he thought that was okay. He said Mason was just a picky eater and it wasn't a big deal. Serena said some kids were sensitive about food and I wouldn't understand because Isla was just a naturally easy child. That sentence, naturally easy, like the way Isla behaved had nothing to do with anything we'd done and was just luck. I told Dan that Isla wasn't naturally easy, that we'd taught her how to behave around other people, and that what I'd just watched Mason do to our mom at her own anniversary dinner wasn't a food sensitivity issue, it was a manners issue. Dan said I needed to stay in my lane. I told him his lane currently had our mom making pasta at her own stove because his 11-year-old son couldn't sit through a meal without getting exactly what he wanted. Serena said I was being judgmental and that different families had different approaches. I told her the approach they'd taken was raising 2 kids who genuinely didn't seem to understand that other people's feelings mattered, that Mason had handed a gift back to my mom at Christmas without a second thought and Dan had laughed, that Chloe had interrupted my dad's story 4 times at dinner last month and neither of them had said a word. Dan stood up and said I had no right to speak about his children like that. I told him I wasn't speaking about his children, I was speaking about his parenting. Pete put his hand on my arm. My mom had appeared in the doorway from the kitchen holding a bowl of pasta, and the look on her face told me she'd heard everything. Dan and Serena left 20 minutes later. Mason complained loudly on the way out that he hadn't finished eating. Nobody said anything. My mom called me the next morning and said I wasn't wrong, but she wished I'd let it go for her sake. I told her she'd spent her anniversary making pasta for a child who'd rejected her cooking, and I couldn't watch that and say nothing. She went quiet and then said she knew. Dan hasn't called me. Serena sent a long message about family respect that I read once. Isla asked me on the way home why Mason got different food, and I told her because sometimes grown-ups forget to teach their kids important things. She nodded like that made complete sense. Subscribe for more stories.